Robert Taft, the great isolationist of the 30s and 40s and 50s, the son of President Taft. And on the domestic front, goodness, I mean, I know he wasn't a Republican, but Senator Bilbo comes to
Theodore
mind.
Bilbo of Mississippi, everybody should remember. Yeah. It is something that you and I and everyone should be talking about, and that is the question of the future of the Republican Party. If we're a two-party system, we have to have a party that functions. And may I just say, because you were reflecting on Bob Taft, why did Eisenhower run for president in 1952? He had a meeting in Washington with Bob Taft, and Bob Taft expressed his view at the time that if he were elected in 52, he would withdraw from NATO. And that's where Eisenhower decided, that's it, I'm running, and may I point out, Donald Trump would withdraw from NATO. Where is the Eisenhower of the Republican Party who will stand up and just point out these historical similarities? It is very disturbing.
Yeah, it's any potential Eisenhower in this day and age would be kicked out of the Republican Party. They would be viewed as disloyal to Trump doctrine, to the extent that such a doctrine exists and is not just an amoeba-like shifting position over the course of time.
You and I will analyze what happens in Iowa. We'll analyze what happens in New Hampshire and in South Carolina. We have a long way to go. By the way, did you hear that Donald Trump included in his potential list of vice presidential nominees none other than Tucker Carlson? I just want to suggest to you, as a former talk show host whose major aspiration in life was to be vice president of the United States, anybody who wants to vote for me for vice president, you got it.
Oh God, you would make 100 times a better choice than Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is oh my God, This is a podcast. There are no FCC regulations on this podcast, but I cannot bring myself to utter the words of contempt that I believe truly befit Tucker Carlson. You, on the other hand, would be a stellar choice for vice president in so many different ways. I note in the way of polling also the fact that according to the Wall Street Journal and the polling they had out on Saturday, that in a hypothetical race, and I know that this is national in terms of its number, and so in terms of our electoral system, it doesn't say a lot about the specifics of the race, but maybe it gives us a sense of the vibe that Nikki Haley in a theoretical presidential race between her and President Biden, she would beat him by 17 points, which is frightening to me. Now, again, I know we do state-by-state elections, and that is how things run in this country, and we are indeed a year out. But so many of the recent polls, and not just individual polls, put in the battleground states, Donald Trump ahead, if you average these polls out, of President Biden. And it brings to mind, again to me, a question that you and I have discussed, which is, should Biden, for the good of the party and the good of the country, step aside so that someone who can more safely and take on and thoroughly trounce Donald Trump, so that they can step forward? I think it's a legitimate question, and if not that, what are they going to do in order to make sure that our democracy is protected? Because given what Trump is planning, it indeed needs protecting.
If this were December the 11th, 1967, I could not have predicted that Lyndon Johnson would withdraw as a candidate for president, that Eugene McCarthy would almost win the New Hampshire primary. I could not have predicted Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination or Bobby Kennedy's assassination, nor, frankly, what happened in Chicago, and certainly not Nixon's election as president. We are too far out. And I also, whenever I think of polls, I think of President Landon, President Dewey, President Hillary Rodham Clinton. I think of how fallible the polls are. And when you take a look at the Iowa caucuses, take a look at who won those caucuses. Most of them did not go on to be the candidate for president.
True enough.
So I have to believe something. And maybe it's my own naivete, but I believe in the end the good sense of the American people will prevail. I have to believe that. By the way, given what happened this week, last week actually, and the resignation of the president of Penn, and now the question of the presidents of Harvard and MIT.
Oh, yes.
I think in the end, if people understand the issues, and if people can really grasp what it means when they talk about context, that maybe, just maybe, there's hope. And I do believe there is hope. I have to believe there's hope. Otherwise, Beowulf, our conversations and all the work that I do on my own podcast would be in vain.
Well, I sincerely hope that your sense of things is better than H.L. Mencken's sense of things, because his confidence in the American people was not as solid as yours.
But let me tell you, I say this, and everyone knows I am a Jew. I am very active in the community that is pro-Israel and in the Jewish community in general. I have never been as scared of what I have seen and heard. And in fact, my synagogue now has a special fund because they've got to beef up security. This absolutely blew me away. A synagogue here in San Francisco is renting a facility from the Catholic Church, a school building, because they're doing renovations, and a spray paint on the side of the building: "Kill the Jews," Palestine will be free. The whole rhetorical thrust. Do you understand that people are taking off their Stars of David, taking off their yarmulkes, removing their mezuzahs from their home? Sally Quinn just did a piece in the Washington Post talking about the fact she's not a Jew, that she has a mezuzah on her home, and to talk about the anguish she has gone through the years. Art Buchwald, by the way, is the one who gave her first mezuzah with Ben Bradley and put it up. You have to understand that where we are today is scary. It is disturbing. One of my great friends, who's a historian, said to me, "John, does this remind you, as it reminds me, of 1938? And the answer is yes. The tests that we face now, including Ukraine, including what happens in the Middle East, including who we elect as president, all of these issues are paramount in our minds and should be vigorously discussed."
Indeed, they should. And there should be never a time in the United States of America where someone cannot state their non-violent political views or express their religion publicly. And they should have always the freedom to do that. And whether it's on a college campus or in a place of worship, and I know that in the Rogue Valley, even before the recent conflict in the Middle East, there were anti-Semitic flyers being distributed by hate groups this very year, and it's something that has given extremist groups an excuse to do the most horrific things, and they have to be denounced, whether it is by the presidents of colleges or people in leadership at any level. We must.
Can you imagine, Beowulf, being asked, 3 university presidents, Penn, Harvard, MIT, to condemn genocide against Jews? Genocide against Jews?
That's
and they're
that's
not
a simple
being willing
thing.
To answer?
That's a simple thing, and regardless of what their codes of conduct do or don't say, the immediate answer could easily be, I don't know what my code of conduct for my university says, but it damn well should oppose genocide.
Can I be clear on one other point?
Absolutely, and they should absolutely, in the strongest terms, denounce it.
Let me be clear on one other point. I am not in favor of censorship. When the Nazis, or as I call them, the Nutsies, marched in Skokie, in the middle of a neighborhood occupied primarily by Holocaust survivors,
Sure.
I was one who stood up and said, let them march. I don't believe in banning slogans. I don't believe in banning books. I don't believe in banning freedom of expression. But I do believe that when such statements are made that are so offensive, we need to confront them and understand why they're so negative. Hubert Humphrey at the Democratic Convention of 1948 stood up in defense of a civil rights plank. And when he was asked about it, he said, look, it's very simple. You don't want these people in the dark corners. You want them exposed to the bright sunshine of exposure.
Exactly.
Because you have to trust that people in the end, in these kinds of things, will repudiate them. And I feel that way about what's going on today, the rise in Jew hatred. I don't call it anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is too polite a term. We've talked about that before. It's Jew hatred. And I feel the same way, frankly, about a Donald Trump, who talks about an enemies list, who talks about weaponizing the Justice Department, who talks about using his presidential power, should he have it again, in the most destructive ways. These kinds of things need to be heard, but they need to be denounced by people of conscience. Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter who you are. And that's the end of my sermon, Beowulf, but it's one that I believe emphatically.
Amen, John. You know, it has to be denounced, and we cannot accept the hatred of Jews. We cannot accept the hatred of Muslims. We cannot accept racism of any kind. And yeah, sure. I mean, as you allude to with Skokie, there is freedom of speech here, but just because that exists doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility as a member of the human race and as an American a citizen to denounce such things, a moral responsibility. And
you remember the story about Benjamin Franklin coming out of Constitution Hall, and he stopped by a woman, and she asks him, well, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic? And Franklin responded, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And we are in the midst of a struggle to keep the republic. I want to go back to something you asked about Joe Biden. I can't tell you what Joe Biden will do in the end. I can tell you in his heart of hearts, he wants to run. He wants to defeat Donald Trump. He believes he can defeat Donald Trump. Will he, in the end, actually stand as a candidate? It's a very good question. And I'm not a prophet. I can't tell you what he will or will not do. But I can tell you, when you're 81 years old, you need to stop and think about whether or not it's a good idea to book yourself into a job for 4 years more. That's one of the toughest jobs in the world. So I only throw that out because I'm a Biden supporter. I've always admired Joe. I like him. But it's a question that Democrats need to ask, and the American people have to ask. By the way, the same thing applies to Donald Trump. He's no spring chicken either.
Very much so. And if you look at the broad course of his statements, frankly, and honestly, with me, age is not my issue with Biden. It comes down to more of an issue over policy and more of an issue of the fact that I don't know whether he's up to beating Donald Trump. But I personally would be very happy to see a Gavin Newsom or a Gretchen Whitmer who are probably further to the right in terms of my personal politics. I would rather see them run and actually make sure that Donald Trump is defeated. I have no, and I think we need to do what's right for the country and what preserves us from going down the road of fascism. That to me is the most important thing. I absolutely believe that the statements that Donald Trump have made are far more indicative of mental issues than anything that Joe Biden has come even close to.
Yeah, whether it's mental issues or a misjudging of American politics. Mm-hmm. Any man who would want to be dictator for a day, any man who would want to suspend the Constitution, any man who would talk about using the executive powers of the presidency for political retribution. And by the way, listen to the people around him and the stories that are being circulated about even going after people in the media. I mean, Kash Patel's statements, which are all over the place, are a disgrace.
Yeah.
No candidate for president should ever have aides around him who make those kinds of statements. And
absolutely not.
That's what has to be thought about. And I must tell you,